What's up, everybody? I hope y'all are having a great day or great night, whatever in the hell. Tonight, we've got Tim Barnett of Stand to Reason. I don't actually know if he's still at Stand to Reason because this particular talk was taken down from their channel and put on his specific channel. And what we're covering here tonight are biblical contradictions. Now, in case you guys don't know, contradictions do exist in the Bible. There are quote unquote contradictions that can be easily explained and rationalized away just because of the fact that human people were writing them and shit like that. So there's that, and then there's real contradictions. I'm going to point out some good contradictions that you could possibly bring up because Tim thinks that we don't know any contradictions unless we consult the internet. Tim is going to be laying out his defense of contradictions, and he's going to be showing how at least one really good contradiction in the Bible really isn't a contradiction. And so we're going to take a look at his defense of that. If you're interested in learning why these contradictions do exist in the Bible and why Tim Barnett is wrong about the one contradiction he tries to debunk, then please stay. I did want to bring up a few good contradictions that you could potentially throw at somebody. So basically, what boils down to a good contradiction in the Bible is something that could not be rationalized away with just the stupidity of the writer. For instance, with the genealogies of Jesus, you could rationalize that by saying, oh, well, one guy was a dumb fuck and he just misunderstood the genealogy, and that's how we have different genealogies. So, like, that's one way they can rationalize around it. Now, in reality, it is a contradiction if the Bible is supposed to be the inerrant word of God. If it is, then even the smallest contradiction is important. If you're dealing with somebody who thinks that the Bible is inerrant, like always inerrant, then every single contradiction is a valid contradiction to bring up, okay? Even the ones that can be rationalized away with the dumb fuckery of the authors, okay? But there are some theological contradictions in the Bible that can't be easily hand-waved away. This first one that I have pulled up here is, does God love everyone? I mean, honey, do you think that God should love everybody in the Bible? I'm just talking like what you were taught as a child. Does God love everybody? When I was being brought up, I was taught, apparently for KC, it's a hard no for her. But for me, growing up, it's a definite yes, that God loves everyone. God loves all the little children of the world, right? Jesus loves all the little children, whatever. Well, as it turns out, this is a theological principle that has a contradiction associated with it. In John 3:16, of course, it says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Yes, I mean, he loves everybody unconditionally, but then there are also passages like Leviticus 20:23 that says, and ye shall not walk in the manners of the nation which I cast out before you, for they committed all those things, and therefore I abhorred them. So this is an instance of God not loving somebody. You could argue that, like, oh, well, that's the Old Testament, and so there's a new covenant, and that's where God loves everybody. But in Romans 9:13, this is from Paul. It says, as it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. Even Paul affirms that God does not love everybody, that he definitely hates some people, or at least he doesn't extend his love to some people based on who they are or something like that. So this is a decent contradiction that you can bring up. How about, does hell exist? I don't know how many of you out there were taught that hell exists in the Bible, but apparently the Bible is split on this. So of course, yes, God tortures people forever after they die. And so you got one from Daniel that's in the Old Testament, and then you got a whole bunch of New Testament stuff. Luke, John, 2 Thessalonians, Revelation. And then, no, those that don't go to heaven just die. Most of it's from the Old Testament. You do have Romans 6:21, which is Paul, who says, what fruit had ye then in those things whereof ye are now ashamed? for the end of those things is death. So it's pretty much just reaffirming that you don't necessarily go to hell, you just die. And instead, instead of getting everlasting life, you just die. Of course, there's, like I said, yes, with the burning and the gnashing of teeth and everything like that, but it's also contradicted, in other portions of the Bible. But you see, all of this is perfectly explained by the fact that there were multiple writers writing different theological structures, and when you put them all together, they're gonna be contradictory. Where the contradictions really come into play, as far as the Bible, like as far as Christian theology goes, is this whole idea that the Bible's inerrant, or that the Bible is God-breathed. Even if you don't think that the Bible's inerrant, you still think it's God-breathed. Like, that's where contradictions kind of come in.
It doesn't take long to speak to an unbeliever before they start bringing up so-called contradictions in the Bible. Here's one, just an example. How did Judas Iscariot die? Well, if you read Matthew, it says this, and throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. Okay, Matthew's clear. He hanged himself. But then you read the book of Acts. This is Luke's account. And Luke says this, now this man, speaking of Judas, acquired a field with the reward of his wickedness, and falling headlong, head first, he burst open in the middle, and all his bowels gushed out. I'm glad we already ate, right?
This particular thing is definitely a contradiction, because what we get from, I believe that was Matthew, in one, Judas, he goes and he hangs himself. And in the other, he buys a field for some fucking reason, and then he throws himself off of a cliff, or I don't know, maybe he just sort of stands there and he falls down and then he bursts open. I'm not exactly sure how all that happened. But in any case, he threw himself down and he burst and his bowels fell out. These are two totally different ways for this motherfucker to die. Now, obviously, you could excuse some like missing references and everything like that, or maybe he didn't say one thing or another. The usual way that apologists, and he's not going to cover this right now. I don't know if he does it later on in the lecture. He just kind of brings this up and he never really addresses it from the stuff that I saw. But generally, how I see apologists like weaseling their way around this particular contradiction is the fact that, or is the idea that in Acts, what it's really talking about is he bought a field and then he hung himself from a tree, and then he fell headlong, which I think means face first, right? Headlong, with the head foremost. Yes, face first. So basically, he's swinging up there on the tree, right? Dead. Of course, Jake Paul comes along and then he falls down, right? Except when he falls down, he doesn't just like drop with gravity and then fall forward. The rope breaks. He does a twist in the air and then falls head first into the ground and then splits open. Is apparently how they reconcile this, which, I mean, maybe there's an apologist out there that can correct me on this, but it's my understanding that he hung himself and then he fell from the tree where he hanged himself from, or hung himself from, and then he burst open. And so that's generally how they get around that particular contradiction. But I mean, this is speculating a lot. This is combining two different accounts that were written so far apart that you really can't combine them, because Luke which the author of Luke, right? The author of Luke wrote Acts. But the author of Luke had Matthew, even copied directly from Matthew. He fucking knew what was in Matthew. He was correcting Matthew. That's what was happening. Like countless other places in the Gospel of Luke where he does something different than Matthew, he's correcting the account. But of course, we just want to hand wave this shit away, right?
We need to be careful to define what we mean by a contradiction. The word gets thrown around by unbelievers when talking about the Bible all the time. But we need to distinguish between a genuine contradiction, which cannot be resolved. It's impossible to reconcile. And a mere difference, which is possible to reconcile. Okay, so the difference between a contradiction and a difference. One can be reconciled and one can't be. Now, to illustrate this, let me tell you about the Titanic. In 1912, the Titanic sank. Big boat, 800 feet long, and eyewitnesses who saw the boat sink had conflicting testimonies. Some eyewitnesses said the boat sank in one piece. Other eyewitnesses said it broke in two and then the two pieces sank. How you can get this wrong, I don't know. But these are contradictory accounts that cannot be reconciled, okay? So that's an example of a contradiction.
This is a good example of a contradiction. This is contradictions in eyewitness accounts, right? Although it does go to show how eyewitness accounts can't be 100% reliable. His whole depiction of how the Titanic sank was a bit fuckered, because like here's a Titanic and he animates it like it's split in two, like in the middle, down towards each other, and then they both sank at the same time. No, motherfucker, it was like this. It got hit in the front part of the ship. The front part sank, and it went down like that, and it started going down as one ship, but the ass was too big. It was a thick bitch. And so it broke in two, and the other part slammed, and then it eventually got drug under with the rest of the ship. Your animations isn't historically accurate, but also the contradictions are easy to explain here because you had people in different spots. It was also like in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the night, with really only the moonlight to light up the area and everything like that. There were some people that were literally too close to the ship to see that it broke apart or whatnot. So that's why the two different accounts exist. It's very easily explained why there were contradictory eyewitness accounts. This is a good example of the good contradictions that exist in the Bible. These are things that are from two different perspectives, and only one perspective can be correct. Just like with Judas, he either hung himself or he bought a field, fell down in it, and exploded for whatever reason. Like, those are two contradictory things. He did one or the other, but he's about to tell us how he can get past it.
Okay, if you didn't get anything else in this lesson, this is how most alleged contradictions come out. It's the reader who misunderstands the author's intent. Sometimes they misunderstand it, sometimes they just misrepresent it, okay?
Oh, yes. Misrepresent the author's intent or misrepresent what's actually in the Bible. Okay, so let's I feel like it's time for another contradictions with GE. How about this one? Does the blood of animal sacrifices take away sin? Yes, definitely. Well, you would both be right and wrong there, honey. Because yes, of course, in the Old Testament, that is how they resolved sin. But you get to Hebrews in the New Testament. I doubly checked this. I went and I read the context. In Hebrews, whoever wrote Hebrews is saying that the animal sacrifices never absolve sin whatsoever. It just seems like it's a bit of a theological problem there. I don't feel like I'm misrepresenting anything because it's very obvious in the Old Testament, God definitely wants you to mutilate cattle and sheep, bulls, all this other shit. Like, he wants you to mutilate those things in order to absolve your sin. And the entire reason for the New Testament is to provide one sacrifice, one blood sacrifice that will prevent all these animal sacrifices. And it replaces it. But for the author of Hebrews, that's because the animal sacrifices just never took away sin whatsoever.
That can happen too. So the error stems in the reader, not the author.
It's definitely the author, Tim.
Let's go. So, helpful principle. Number one, the first false expectation that leads people to believe there's contradictions in the Bible is that selection or omission is a denial. It shouldn't need to be said, but authors can't write everything, right? They have to select from certain things.
Hey, authors can't write everything? Like, what are you fucking talking about here? If the Gospels are supposed to be biographies of the life of Jesus, wouldn't you expect them to, like, mention a few things, like, all the time? There are several things in here that, you know, you just can't hand wave away like this. You should definitely expect, like, if you're writing a biography, for that biography to cover that person's life, maybe not completely 100% in total, like on the 3rd day of the 5th June of the 3rd year, he had eggs. Like, I'm not talking about that kind of thing. I'm talking about important events that happen in his life. Those things should all be the common things that every single gospel reports. And if there was one true gospel, then there would be no need for other gospels. There would be no need for other points of view. But you see, the problem is that they all had different ideas about what Jesus supposedly did. Because he didn't really exist. Just gonna throw that out there.
That's just the nature of being an author. And so one of these kinds of stories that affects this particular principle, what we can use this principle for, is the description of the women discovering the empty tomb. How many women discovered the empty tomb? Was it 1, 2, 3, or more? Depends which gospel you read, right?
Yes. So this is one of the bigger contradictions that's actually a contradiction. I'm kind of curious as to how he's going to try to get around it. So basically, depending on which gospel you read, you get different versions of how the tomb was found by these women. You get different numbers of women. You get different women altogether that are visiting the tomb. And so basically, you can't just assume things, right? You can't just assume that they are only focusing on one particular group of women, and that, you know, the others were really there. They just didn't mention them, right? That's speculation. That's an ad hoc explanation for it, right? What you have to do is look at each gospel in their context, okay? So I'm going to let him go through his presentation, but I just want to let y'all know how I see this. So Mark is the first one that's written, right? So he's got his group of women, or woman. I can't remember exactly the number right now. Like I said, I don't have this shit memorized yet. But anyways, Mark has one group of women. Then Matthew, using Mark, comes in and corrects Mark and has a different group of women. And then Luke, having both Matthew and Mark, comes back in and was like, nah, all y'all got this shit wrong. This is how it really happened. And he provides a completely different group of women. And then John comes in and he's like, all y'all motherfuckers are stupid. Jesus is definitely conservative. He was shooting his guns in the air. Fuck yeah, I'm God. And then this entirely different set of women, not entirely different, but like different in the sense that it was not the same as the other groups of women. This is the real group of women that came and found the tomb. It depends on which Bible you read, because each gospel has a different version of events. And this isn't easily reconcilable. You can't just speculate shit away. You actually have to deal with this particular contradiction, because only one of them can be right.
So the Apostle John, he names Mary Magdalene specifically in John 20, verse 1. He says this: now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark, and he saw the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Now, this is actually a literary device. It's they apply it in Greco-Roman biographies. It's called spotlighting. John is zooming in. You guys have probably been to a play before. They got the spotlights going. There could be lots of people on stage, but the spotlight is on one person.
Okay, so a note on spotlighting. I don't know all that much about the use of spotlighting in other Greco-Roman biographies and everything like that, but I mean, that's besides the point. The fact is that this is supposed to be a historical account of the tomb being found empty. You cannot import information from other Bibles or other Gospels, because each gospel was written for the community that it existed within. It was only later that the Christian community, like on the whole, adopted these 4 gospels, right? But in any case, so you cannot say that, like, oh, we know who else was with Mary, or there were other people that were with Mary. You have to have something concrete from John that says other people were with Mary. And so right now, as it exists, we just have Mary Magdalene that we know. Supposing that anybody else was there with her at this point is pure speculation.
Remember, selection is not a denial. That's our first principle. John selects Mary Magdalene, but that doesn't mean he's saying that there's no one else there. There's no other women.
Well, right. He's not saying there was no other women there with her, but he is also not mentioning that there were other women there with her. And so you can't speculate that there were women there with her. All you know is that Mary was there.
Remember, selection is not a denial. That's our first principle. John selects Mary Magdalene, but that doesn't mean he's saying that there's no one else there. There's no other women. In fact, when you read the next verse, this is what it says. Very interesting. So she ran and went to Simon Peter, the other disciple, speaking of John, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Who's the we? Mary, who's the we? John, who's the we? We is the other women. So let's just put some women on the screen, okay?
Now, I'm not all that great at English, but honey, does that sound like the we in that passage is talking about this idea that there were women that went with her? It says, "Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved." Actually, that's Lazarus, not John, son of Zebedee. And said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Right. So we don't know who this we is. He's speculating that it's talking about other women. He's importing information from the other gospels. But you see, the problem is that the Gospel of John definitely uses the other gospels. So he knows that the other gospels claim that other women went there. But he's importing that knowledge into this story. He's selectively taking that knowledge. What we get from John's writing is not that other women were with her. It's just that some ambiguous amount of people were with her. An ambiguous group of persons that came with her back from, even when she's running to the tomb, it talks about her in the singular. It was just her who met up with the other apostles, or met up with apostles. So, I mean, he's just purely speculating that other women were with her.
We don't know who those women are yet. Let's see who they are. Well, if we read the other gospel accounts, let's start with Matthew. Matthew says that Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were specific eyewitnesses of the empty tomb. It says this, "Now after the Sabbath, towards the dawn of the first day, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb." He doesn't say only they went to see the tomb. He just names those two people, okay?
I mean, he doesn't say that they were the only ones, but they are the only ones that he mentions. It's like if I say, well, hey, me and Bob went to the store, and somebody else says, oh, does that mean Jim Bob was with you? Or not, sorry, that's a little bit confusing. Does that mean Jimmy's with you? No, I didn't say Jimmy was with me. Why would you think Jimmy was with me? Well, you didn't say that he wasn't with you. It does. It does sound like a Christian thing to say, honey.
There could be other women, so let's just put them up there for a minute.
There could be other women. So let's just go ahead and add the women up there like they were there from the beginning. Yes, it's convenient for him. And so, I mean, he takes let's just go ahead and put that there were women there. Like, it's just amazing the leap that they go through in order to get there. That's right, honey. It is bullshit.
Let's see what Mark has to say. Mark says this, "When the Sabbath was passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James," another Mary, it's a lot of Marys, okay, "and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb." So now we have Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. But we already know that that other Mary is there too, according to Matthew.
See, this is where he fucks up, because Matthew was written significantly later than Mark. Mark does not say anybody else was with those three women. So you cannot import more information from a different gospel telling a different story into this story right here. It would be a lot like me reading Harry Potter and then taking some other different tangentially related story and trying to explain things in Harry Potter with that. I guess it would be a lot like using 50 Shades of Grey to fill in Twilight plot holes, right? Because it started out as a Twilight fan fiction. It would be somewhat similar to that. And so it's really quite ridiculous that what he's doing here. The fact is that Mark doesn't mention other people, so you can't say that he mentions other people. Well, I mean, you can say it, but it's fucked up to say it. Like it's definitely not correct in any kind of sense. You're right, honey. They haven't cared about making sense so far.
But maybe there's other women too. We don't know.
Well, that's right. You don't know. There could be no other women there. There could be a plethora of, there could be a gaggle of women, a whole gaggle of women that went to the tomb, but binders full of women went to the fucking tomb. And under your idea, any number of women, the entire population of women from Jerusalem went to the fucking tomb on that morning. Under Tim's explanation of this particular contradiction, that is totally plausible and is therefore probable. So just put them there. Put all the women there. You know, speculating like this. I mean, what he's doing is he's using an argument from silence, but he's using it fallaciously. He's saying, oh, well, he doesn't mention these people, but that doesn't mean that they weren't there. It's like, well, you're right. Doesn't mean that they weren't there, but we also don't have any kind of fucking indication that they were there. At least in the view, like the point of view of Mark, we don't know about any other women.
Let's read Luke and find out. Luke's account doesn't conflict with the others, actually complements them by describing a larger list of women. Luke says this, but on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb taking spices that they had prepared. If you jump to verse 10, it says this. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna. Where'd Joanna come from, right? No one mentioned her before. Joanna and Mary, the mother of James. So she was listed in Matthew as well. And the other women with them. The other women with them. So we already know who they are. At least Salome and that other Mary, right?
No, not right. Because in the view of Luke, who's correcting the previous Gospels before him, he is giving an accurate account. And the only women that we know that are there are this Jonna bitch from the other side of the tracks. We got Mary and then Mary Magdalene. Those are the three. He's correcting the other Gospels. And he's saying that, yeah, there were other women with them, but we don't know who. Hell, it could have been Becky. Or what about fucking Tiffany or some shit that went with them to the tomb? We don't know, but he's going to import the lists of the other Gospels and claim that this is the full list. This is who he was talking about. And the author of Luke is just speaking ambiguously and is not giving us an indication that we know who else was there. From Luke's point of view, it was these three main women and then just like the actors that are just in the shot to like fill the scene up. Extras. They're just extras. They're not important. We don't need to know who they are. Like, it seems to me like that's what he's saying. And not that, oh, there were these other women that were there. And you can reference the other Gospels in order to know who they are if you really care about that kind of shit.
And so we have here a list of women. Again, there's no contradiction here. There's no contradiction. We have at least 5 women named specifically. There may have been more.
Well, yeah, no, there is a contradiction because you're having to import information from outside of the respective Gospels in order to get this list that apparently reconciles all of them. And you're also assuming that like Mark was speaking about these other women when he gives no indication that he was. You're doing the same for Matthew, and you're doing the same for John. The only account that says that there were other women, other unnamed women, at least explicitly, is Luke. John kind of indirectly suggests that there were other women, but even in that context, we can't tell if the author of John is speaking about possibly other women that went to the tomb. Maybe there was an apostle that came in, or it could have been when she got back to the camp or wherever they were staying, and she met up with the other apostles, and then they came and talked to whoever in the fuck, and they were like, we don't know where he is. And she's talking about herself and the apostles. That's totally possible too. But he makes the jump to, oh, that means there's other women, so I'm just going to put 5 more women up there, or 3 more, or whatever in the fuck. Possible, therefore probable. Bitches.
There's no contradiction. It's only a contradiction if you assume that selecting and naming individual women denies the other ones being there, okay?
It's not that we're saying that they're denying it, but it's exactly the opposite. We're saying that they're not even referencing them. They're not even referencing these other women. And so you can't say that they are doing it when they don't do it. That's a far cry from us saying that they're denying it. We're just reading the words on the page and we're relaying what's on the fucking page. He can say whatever the fuck he wants. He's a goddamn apologist. Apparently there's no rules there. What I take away from Tim's video tonight is that there are no contradictions in the Bible as long as you can use the argument from silence, fallaciously, I might add, to assume that just because they're focusing on certain portions of the story, that doesn't mean that they're denying these other portions that do exist, but they probably definitely happened. As long as you can, combine both of the stories in some kind of way, and you come up with a list of women, if you will, for this particular one that satisfies all the stories. So obviously Mark was talking about not just the 3 women he mentioned, but also all the other women that were supposedly there. Yeah, let's just speculate about everything in the Bible. Hey, just because it doesn't mention it doesn't mean that it's denying it. Remember that when somebody brings this kind of shit up, because I'm betting that they'll want to deny some shit at that point. You start bringing up uncomfortable shit like whale penises and stuff, I'm fairly certain that they will deny the fuck out of it. Anyways, that's going to be it for the show tonight. But if you're leaving out right now, why don't you smash that like button for me? It would really help me out. And if you're not subscribed yet, you should definitely subscribe, because, that's just the cool thing to do right now. Subscribe and you'll get more content from me that you never asked for. If you will, please stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.